Hello everyone. So last week, woohoo! This week we're going to go through chapter 18, 19, and 20. Let's start with chapter 18. Remember, these are my personal notes on the text, and you can find the Word document that you see here under the week 5 questions thread and my notes post, right? So first I always put the objectives. Let's go down to chapter 18. So chapter 18, we're going to do our brief definitions, right? Ecology is the study of how everything, meaning animals, works together. So how do the animals work with the plants that work with you can include the land, everything. So the entire planet could be considered one ecological system, okay? Biotic factors. Now this is all living stuff in the environment. So I know even I can tend to think of ecology as the only living stuff, but in actuality, it is the biotic factors that make up the biotic or living section, and of course the abiotic factors that make up the non-living. Okay, so what is organismal ecology? This is studying how organisms adapt to the non-living environment. So how do they adapt to the fact that there's a mountain there, a lake there? What are they going to do about that? Okay. Population, this is a little bit from last week, is a group of interbreeding individuals. So individual organisms that are able to mate and have fertile offspring. Population ecology concentrates mainly on factors that affect population density and growth. So this is going to be focusing specifically on population. So not the individual, but now the group. Community, see we're getting bigger and bigger, is everybody that lives in the same area. So this is all the populations in a specific area and how they interact. Community ecology is how communities work together, right? Ecosystems include typically the community and the abiotic, so the animals and all their various little populations, including the non-biological stuff, right? What is ecosystem ecology? These are questions, concerns about energy flow, which we're going to talk about this week, and the cycling of chemicals among the various biotic and abiotic factors. How does oxygen move around? How does nitrogen move around? How does the energy that plants consume, or create rather, how does the energy that plants create get consumed by herbivores, and then by our consumers, and then by our top predators? Here's a checkpoint. So, just a little thing. Think about what would happen if you had like a nuclear power plant in your area. Do you need corridors for the animals to get around? If you create something that's going to interfere with an ecological system, how do you then make it so the animals can still continue on their pathway? Think about Africa with our elephants. They used to go all across Africa. Now they're stuck in little national parks. How does this affect the ecology? So all organisms require a usable source of energy to live, usually solar, sometimes hydrothermal vents. Talk about those critters. Our hydrothermal vents are unusual, right? Because they live down there and they're able to use the heat and different things to create energy. Fun to look up. I think I talked about that last week. How to deal with more or less light. So if you have a lot of light, you're going to be more like a plant. If you have low light, maybe you're going to turn to a blind cave shrimp. You don't need eyes anymore. You're in the deep of the ocean. Maybe create your own light. Temperature is an important abiotic factor because of its effect on metabolism. We talked about this a little bit with homeostasis, right? Few organisms can maintain a sufficiently active metabolism at temperatures close to 0 degrees and temperatures above 45 degrees C, because these destroy the enzymes in most organisms. But there are examples like snow algae, which apparently I can't spell, that are different. Water is essential for life. Think about how much of the earth is made up of water, how much of our cells are made up to water. For terrestrial organisms, so dudes that live on the land, the primary threat is drying out in the air. How do they deal with? We have hard eggshells for our birds, right? Instead of the fish that have soft eggs that kind of gelatinous. You know, we have to have some way to keep ourselves hydrated. Good things. Let's scroll down. A gradual, though still reversible, physiological adjustment that occurs in response to environmental change is called an acclimation. So like you think about how you acclimatize to something, get used, like if you move from Florida to Massachusetts, the first winter is going to kill you, but then you slowly learn to adjust to it, right? One good example is in Tierra del Fuegos on the very tip of Argentina, a little island. They have a different body temperature because they're dealing with such craziness. Do people different in the Himalayas? How do we deal with this? Dung beetles I will be talking about a lot this week because I love them. They're so funny. They make me happy. Okay, so in contrast to plants, most animals can respond to unfavorable change in the environment by moving to a new location. Some plants do weird things like this, but it's pretty much just an animal thing. Such movement may be fairly localized. For example, many desert ectotherms, including reptiles, maintain a reasonably constant body temperature by shuttling between the sun and the shade, right? And here's a good video on migrations. If you get a chance, I think this is the Discovery video show on migration. It's beautiful. They have a beautiful book too. It's amazing. Fresh water biomes cover less than 1% of the earth, and they contain a mere 0.01% of its water, but they harbor a disproportionate share of biodiversity and estimate 6% of all described species. Moreover, we depend on fresh biomes for drinking water, crop irrigation, sanitation, and industry. Freshwater biomes fall into two broad groups: standing water, like lakes and ponds, or flowing waters, like rivers and streams. This makes me think, what happens if we do desalination plants? Many lakes and ponds are affected by large inputs of nitrogen and phosphorus from sewage and runoff of fertilized lawns and farms, right? So that's what they use to fertilize. To get their plants happy, they have to add extra stuff. These nutrients often produce heavy growth of algae, which results in a reduced light penetration. When the algae die and decompose, a pond or lake can suffer serious oxygen depletion. I want to say deoxygenation. Killing fish that are adapted to high oxygen conditions. So cichlids in Africa, they introduced the perch, right? And that led to a lack of oxygenation since the cichlids moved up and down the water column, causing oxygen to move throughout it, while the perches just stay at one level. It's not causing oxygen to get to all the levels and having some big issues. The Salton Sea in California, there's a link for this, and this is where it was a lake actually created because of farmers, very high levels of nitrogen in the rest, and has led to a lot of fish death. Very interesting place. Did I go too far? I don't know. Let's check. Nope. Okay, scrolling down. Scrolling. Rivers and streams, which are bodies of flowing water, generally support quite different communities of organisms than lakes and ponds. That just kind of makes sense, right? Because you have to be able to live in a standing water versus moving water. It'd be like living in no wind versus constant wind. A little bit different requirements. Many streams and rivers have been affected by pollution from human activities. We have also altered rivers by constructing dams used for flood control to prevent reservoirs of drinking water, to provide, or to generate hydroelectric power. In many cases, dams have completely changed the downstream ecologies, altering the rate and volume water flow and affecting fish and invertebrate populations. So one fish you always hear about is salmon. They go to the sea, come back to the fresh water. Dams have really messed them up. Another example I would think about would be Egypt with the Answar. Is that right? I hope so. Answar Dam. And that's where they dammed it to try to control the flooding, but they didn't realize that the flooding was leading to the fertilization of the farms downstream and has caused a bunch of issues, and standing water in the wrong places led to an increase in malaria. So you need to do a lot of research before you put in a dam. It doesn't always benefit. So let's look at wetland. A wetland is a transitional biome between the aquatic ecosystem and the terrestrial one. Freshwater wetlands include swamps, bogs, and marshes. How do they help with snow? So here's a good little link. And when I lived in Washington, there's a lot of wetlands that people complained about. We had flooding all over the state one year. But the wetlands, all the people who live near wetland, no problem, because this wetland knows how to handle and is created because it needed to handle that extra water and keep the rest of the area from flooding. So it's very, very, very important. Zooplankton are free-floating animals, and including many microscopic ones. Fishes, marine mammals, and other types of animals are abundant in the pelagic photic zone, and this is really fun to see under a microscope. It's a good link. Zooplankton are an easy way to study global climate change, and they also provide food to many of the larger species. Okay. Coral reef is a biome that occurs in the photic zone of warm tropic waters in scattered locations around the globe. A coral reef is built up slowly by successive generations of coral animals, a diverse group of cnidarians that secrete a hard external skeleton, and by multicellular algae encrusted with limestone. How is the diversity affected in these things? Why do we care so much about coral reefs? What makes them so special? The biggest one is in Australia. The second largest one is off of Belize. Beautiful. I was like, I know there's got to be more. Oh, I have a pretty picture. I love a pretty picture. So it shows you nice picture of just who lives where. You know, we got a nice little intertidal zone. We find tide pools, continental shelf, so not too deep. Then we get stuff that's going to live in the top area, the middle area, and the very few things that live down below. I love this guy. Anglerfish make me happy. They're so fun. So more in the water world. The intertidal zone, where the ocean meets the land. This is the shores pounded by waves during high tide and exposed to the sun and drying winds during low tide. The rocky intertidal zone is home to many sedentary organisms, so they're just going to hang around. And these include algae, barnacles, and mussels, which attach to rocks and are thus prevented from being washed away, right? And on sandy beaches, suspension-feeding worms, clams, and predatory crustaceans bury themselves in the ground. Here's a nice little link. I try to provide you a link for every biome. It gets a little crazy. An estuary is a transition area between a river and the ocean. The saltiness of estuaries ranges from nearly that of freshwater to that of the ocean. How do animals deal with salt? Like, what makes you unique? Certain sharks can go from fresh to salt, but most can only stay in salt. So how do you deal with that? This will be a lot. Remember, week 1 we talked about your cells getting too much water, too little water, and salt is one way to regulate that. Let's go down. From worldwide declines in commercial fish species to dying coral reefs to beaches closed by pollution, danger signs abound. Because of the proximity to land, estuaries are especially vulnerable. Many have been completely replaced by development on landfill. Other threats include nutrient pollution, contamination by pathogens or toxic chemicals, alteration of freshwater inflow, and introduction of non-native species. Think about San Francisco, not so much in an estuary, but the zebra mussels, bad. Coral reefs have suffered from many of the same problems. Excessive fishing has also upset the species balance in some reef communities and greatly reduced diversity. Do we have man-made coral reefs? What do they use? The widespread and massive deaths of reef-building corals in some regions have been attributed to the rising sea surface temperatures. Ocean acidification is also a serious threat. A 2008 assessment of coral reefs found that 19% had already fallen. Oh shoot. Wake up. Come on. Okay, my computer freaked out. I don't know. Sorry for the momentarily black screen. My computer doesn't think I'm moving enough. Okay, so a 2008 assessment of coral reefs found that 19% had already fallen victim to a combination of factors and warned that most of the remaining reefs could disappear by 2040 if the trend continues. Do shrimp farms affect this? Other questions to think about is, what does it matter if we have no more coral reefs? What happens to this planet? Does it even matter? Okay, I'm going to continue on, I think, with rainforests in the next session. So this is going to be another two-parter. I hope this is helping make the biomes make a little more sense.